So I get asked, how do we remove late payments from your credit report? Now, there's a lot of strategies behind this, but I think the most important thing to understand is that when you do ask for a late payment removal, is there going to be a consequence where that negative item or possibly the negative mark will take off the account entirely from your credit reports? And also, what's the consequences of having those items removed, even though they're still active and open when it comes to that late payment? What are some of the strategies that you can implement to make sure that that ongoing account history still remains? So in this video, I'm going to break down some of the strategies that you can apply when it comes to removing those late payments. Stay tuned. So removing late payments is not complicated. I think the biggest thing that we need to understand is exactly the time as which it was late. So for example, you could have been late because of medical circumstances, financial circumstances. And so long as you have some sort of documented evidence that you were late due to those circumstances, I think the creditor that you're having an account with might consider a goodwill adjustment. And the reason why this would work is because, see, a lot of people are always paying on time their bills, right? They're always making up for, let's say, those relationships. They're always trying to keep up to date when it comes to credit reports. So with the creditor that you've been established with, we have a decent credit history with, you have a decent payment history with, especially if your time frame with them in that relationship is beyond 12 months or so, I think it's very critical that you leverage that relationship. So what you can do is, if you have documented evidence, that's one way to go ahead and ask for a goodwill adjustment. That's simply calling in the credit account, the credit furnisher that you have, asking them, hey, can we get that late payment adjusted? Can we do something about that, which would help us transition into a position where we can basically, get that adjusted because I was late because of those circumstances, because I couldn't afford to pay my bill at that time because I had other obligations that I had to take care of. And you would document it in a way that shows them, hey, look, if you notice my credit history with you guys, the payment history, I was never late. I was always on time. And even though I was always on time, it's just that one time I was late. How do we go about fixing this, right? So that's one strategy that you can use when it comes to fixing your late payment. So again, pick up the phone, call your creditor or the account that you have, and ask them for a goodwill adjustment. And that goodwill adjustment shouldn't take you too long. You just have to ask them, hey, I was late just that once. And based on that, if you can do a goodwill adjustment, I'd greatly appreciate that. And in most circumstances, given you have documented evidence in your positive relationship with that creditor, and that's why I say aspire to have at least 12 months in that relationship. Anything sooner than that might even not work, so it's going to be a wasted effort. Sometimes it might, depending on the mood of the customer service rep or the credit adjustment rep. But I think the most important thing is have a good 12 months on your belt. So at least this way you're prepared, and then there's nothing wrong with that. So that's the first strategy. Let's move on to the second tactic. Our second strategy comprises of looking at the credit report and analyzing the erroneous information that's there, right? So what I mean by that is sometimes the adjustment of the payment can simply be made by requesting a correction with the credit reporting agency. In turn, they would go ahead and ask your creditor to make sure that they're reporting on a compliant basis. What does that mean, being compliant? It simply means that the information that's appearing on your credit report doesn't contain any mistakes or errors, which then in turn would reflect on you as a character to be not creditworthy. And the reality is, just because of one late payment doesn't necessarily make your entire credit report look faulty. So what we do in that situation is we ask the credit bureaus to review the late payment information that's on their snapshot. And what you're simply doing is making sure that the late payment information that was submitted is in fact accurate. Is it compliant to the reporting standards? And I teach more about that in the Ultimate Personal Credit Mastery. Obviously, there's a lot more details when it comes to understanding compliance, the protocols of reporting, but just asking them the two simple questions is, hey, number one, the item that you see here, it states that it was late payment. How do we ensure that this is not a mistake? And number two, were they compliant when it came to reporting that late payment? Because I feel that they were not. That's the only two statements that you have to put out there to help your situation when it comes to a late payment. So if you do that, what happens is there might be an adjustment what they put it up to paid as agreed, right? Or let's just say that, hey, that late payment was removed. Please review your account summary. Now, it depends. It's not always going to work. There's other alternative strategies that you can apply. Now, like I said, I teach a lot of that stuff in terms of the compliance side to it, the formatting side to it, to ensure that they're FCRA, FCBA compliant. on the Ultimate Personal Credit Mastery. But just those two items alone should help you move forward with your negative late payment removal. Let's move on to the next best tactic. Now, we talked about the goodwill adjustment. We talked about removing it based on compliance and whether or not it was a mistake if they put it in the report in the first place. The third strategy really requests that you completely challenge the item in its entirety. And what I mean by that is there's a lot of information that's in your credit report, specifically if you're using Identity IQ, because Identity IQ for me does a great job of explaining the entire snapshot of that item, right? It gives you a payment grid 24-month. I know Credit Check Total do that too. But what happens with Identity IQ is it actually makes it easier for you to analyze across all three, the same item. So when you analyze that, you're going to see a lot of errors, whether it be in account information, payment information, account status, comments, etc., etc. If they're not compliant and if they're not linear across all three, there's a challenge, there's an issue there. So what you can do is, instead of worrying about the late payment on its own, look for other information that you feel that you can challenge or dispute, because in that situation what happens is now the entire account status is being removed. Now the entire account is in jeopardy, and therefore that adjustment might actually remove those late payments in the process. So that's just an alternative strategy that you can use, I believe, to help your situation when it comes to late payment removals. That's just one of the many tactics that I teach in the Ultimate Personal Credit Mastery, but I just wanted to give you that alternative strategy. So let's assume the goodwill adjustment did not work. Let's assume the late payment compliance side of it, whether they were they had the right to report that late payment, whether they were compliant during the time they reported that late payment. Let's assume that didn't work. Now what you're doing is you're going based on the account on its own in its entirety. And in most circumstances, those reports are consistently putting up information that's just 100% non-compliant. There's a lot of different issues there. So you should use that tactic as a means to attack them in that process. So that's just an alternative way to attack those late payments. So let's move on to our final strategy here. So our final strategy is pretty tricky. You might have to go around the credit reporting agencies for this one. And what I mean by that is you would contact the credit account that actually posted that late payment and request that they look into whether or not they followed the compliance protocols of the Fair Credit Billing Act, whether they had every right to report that, whether or not the statement dates were in conjunction with that late payment, whether or not you respected that payment yet they misreported that information. So what I mean by that is you would contact the creditor who's posting up that late payment, and what you'd simply ask is, hey, look, I understand that you're saying I put that late payment up, but during the time that you reported that late payment to the credit bureaus, can you tell me what the situation, the balance was at the time? Can you tell me whether you followed the protocols of the Fair Credit Billing Act, that you didn't put any surcharges, that's unethical or just non-compliant to make it go into a late payment status? Because sometimes what happens is during the accounting of that late payment, there's surcharges that are added. There are certain things that are just not right. So when that comes to the Fair Credit Billing Act, that means that they're not really being compliant to the reporting standard, because of those extra surcharges, your late payment must have been put on that credit report, right? So that can affect you in a negative way. So what you can simply do is, if you have those surcharges, if you have evidence of that late payment, then they added some extra surcharges. In those situations, if you do the math, and if because of those surcharges it costs you to be late, and you request that they remove that, that could be a way to kind of like challenge the credit reporting side and say, look, they removed those surcharges, that late payment wasn't supposed to be there. Can you take this information and adjust it? So that's a legitimate, authorized by the account that you have with, or the creditor, stating that, hey, look, we made a mistake, the client is always on time, they're good, so let's remove that surcharge. And due to that removal of that surcharge, which costs your account to go into a 30-day late, you can make that adjustment with the credit reporting agencies. That's one of the many tactics, I believe. It's a very powerful tactic. And again, that requires a little bit of the goodwill side of the work, but at the same time, it requires for you to know, the math, for you to know, hey, what's my minimum payment at the time? What was my balance at the time? So if you don't ask those questions, you'll never know. But if you do ask the right questions, you do pick up the phone, and you do take your time to question the time of which it was reported and what the math was at the time and what the compliance protocols were at the time when it came to reporting, you'll find a lot of different information that can actually help you and arm you with the right knowledge to remove those late payments. So that is the 4 ways that you can use when it comes to removing a late payment from your credit reports. Now, the final and bonus point I'd like to give you guys is there's advanced strategies out there, right? When it comes to late payments, what happens is that's a huge part of your credit, report. That's a 35% mark when it comes to comprising your FICO score. Now, yesterday I talked about the FICO 10 and the FICO 10T, which are the trends. If you're late in one of those 12-month to 24-month periods, it's going to affect you drastically. So what you want to do is you want to make those adjustments ASAP. And what you still want to do also is you want to continue building those relationships with the creditor. What you want to do is you want to constantly improve, let's say your limits that you have with those creditors. Going back to them, asking them for an adjustment to increase the limit without the hard inquiry, because that does look desperate. So you can do that if they have a promotion going on. But let's assume they don't have the promotion going on right now. What you can do is simply call back in 30 days and keep asking, because what you have the right to do is verify if that information will help you move forward when it comes to increasing not only your FICO score but maintaining solid credit history. Especially when the FICO 10T, the trends model, steps into the place. What's going to happen now is you can either get a bump on your credit score or a negative derogatory adjustment on your credit report, because the trends are going to be considered more than ever. So before that bump kicks in, start building some positive financial habits. Make those adjustments with your late payments when it comes to your creditors. And if you're looking for high-end structures and compliance and advanced education, I strongly encourage you to review the Ultimate Personal Credit Mastery course. We got a lot of movements that are happening. We're putting a lot of information that's new. We're teaching people how to sweep their own credit, some of the advanced strategies and tactics out there, as well as how to start their own credit repair company. Now, with that said, I hope this video helped you on how you can remove the late payments, specifically the 5 or 4 tactics with the bonus strategy of goodwill adjustments and all these type of things. And of course, making sure that you improve your credit score in the process of removing those late payments. This is your guide and mentor, Ali Taraftar. If you're new to this channel, don't forget to subscribe and turn that bell icon on so every time there's a video like this, you'll be first to be notified. With that said, I'll see you guys next time. Bye for now.